Hello, hello. Wonderful to have you here. I hope you're having a great day too. Today, what I want to do is discuss another aspect, an aspect of the elements practice in early Buddhism. Last video I discussed one aspect of this elements, a practice with the four elements around non-self. And I'll leave a link to that video down below in the notes in case you're interested in seeing that. But there are a number of different practices around these four elements that we find in early Buddhism that are subtly different. They have different aspects, different ways of looking at them. And so today I want to focus on a different one of these practices involving equanimity. These are practices where we try to cultivate an attitude of remaining unperturbed by the vicissitudes of life. There are a couple of different suttas in which the Buddha describes this type of elements practice. In one of these suttas, he's discussing the elements practice with his son Rahula, who is young at the time, and we can imagine would be ripe for just this kind of teaching. He would need to undertake a practice of equanimity, because as we all know, as youths, as kids, we tend to be anything but equanimous with the world. In the other sutta involves the Buddha's right-hand disciple, Sariputta, who was accused at one point, at least according to the suttas, accused by another monastic of having mistreated him and not apologized. And in response to that accusation, Sariputta, among other things, gives a kind of a small teaching around equanimity and the four elements. And these practices are parallel in many respects. So to begin with, we can begin with the earth element. Here we'll turn first to the Buddha's description of the practice to his son Rahula. In this sutta, the Buddha says to his son that he should meditate like the earth. The Buddha says, "For when you meditate like the earth, pleasant and unpleasant contacts will not occupy your mind. Suppose they were to toss both clean and unclean things on the earth, like feces, urine, spit, pus, and blood. The earth isn't horrified, repelled, and disgusted because of this." Here, the Buddha is describing essentially remaining equanimous, or we might say remaining okay, with both pleasant and unpleasant experiences. That's how the Buddha begins this framing to his son, that this is a practice of remaining okay, remaining unperturbed by pleasant experiences and by unpleasant experiences. And earth here, in particular the earth, we might say, the earth is the primary example of the earth element. The earth here is in a position of supporting things, of holding them up, of giving them a place. But it does this without care or worry. It does this from a position of equanimity. Now, to be fair, within an early Buddhist understanding, the earth element in general and the earth in particular are not sentient. There are earth deities and so on, but that's different from the earth itself. The earth itself is a non-sentient object, but I think we get the point here, is that if we think of the earth as a kind of inspiration to us, it can help us to become equanimous with things that are thrown upon us just as they might be thrown upon the earth. Now, in the other sutta that I mentioned, Sariputta is, as I say, he was accused by another monastic of having attacked him and left without apologizing. And in response to this, Sariputta gives a discourse on the elements. In particular, he discusses, to begin with, the earth element. He says that he lives with a heart like the earth, abundant, expansive, limitless, free of enmity and ill will. And this explanation here echoes what we might say are the practices of what are called the Brahma Viharas, the abodes of the gods, the abodes of Brahma. And these practices are the practices of metta, or loving kindness, of karuna, or I should say compassion, of sympathetic joy, that is joy in the positive or happy experiences of other people, and finally of equanimity, which is what we're really discussing in today's video. And all of these are aspects of Sariputta's practice. Essentially what Sariputta is saying, and he does say that, if he had been unmindful, he might have accidentally, or perhaps, again, if he were completely unmindful, he might even intentionally have attacked this other monastic and left without apologizing. That would be the unmindful, the mindless thing to do, but that he himself is not ever unmindful. He's quite aware of what's going on around him at all times, and indeed he has this expansive or limitless heart. This limitlessness is a characteristic of these Brahmaviharas, because all of these are said to be emotional states that we expand limitlessly into the world without excluding anything. If we're excluding things, then we're not practicing the Brahmaviharas correctly, or at least not perfectly. The perfect practice is one where we extend this loving kindness, we extend this compassion, this sympathetic joy, and this equanimity out to the entirety of the world. The second and related practices involve water. And in the case where the Buddha is discussing this practice with his son Rahula, he mentions how water can clean off the dirt that gets on anything. The pus, the blood, the urine, the excrement that gets on anything, water will wash it off equally. And the water doesn't care what it's washing off. It's equanimous. It doesn't mind the fact that it's being used to wash off something that we find disgusting or repellent. It washes it off all the same. And equally, Sariputta, when accused in this way by another monastic, talks about how he lives with a heart like water. That's just like he said before, it was a heart like earth, which is expansive and limitless, also a heart like water that's expansive and limitless and free of ill will, that doesn't have ill will towards anyone, that has loving kindness and indeed equanimity towards all beings. It has the same ideas, the same emotional states towards everybody. The third one of these, either we could call them contemplations or practices, involves fire. And here, once again, when the Buddha is talking to his son Rahula, he talks about how fire can burn anything, that it doesn't care, it's equanimous about what's in front of it, it'll burn it all. Tell me I know. So it'll burn pus, blood, feces, urine, everything will be burned up, evaporated by this fire. Fire can be thought of in this context as kind of a cleansing thing. It cleanses the dirt that is on whatever surface it burns up, and it doesn't care. Once again, it's equanimous. It's without any. It doesn't get emotionally involved, shall we say, in the character of the thing that it's burning. It simply burns it all. And in the same way, you won't be surprised to hear that Sariputta says that he lives with a mind like fire, that once again is limitless, that is equanimous, that is has loving kindness towards all things, that is without ill will. This idea of fire being limitless, or any of these four elements being limitless, part of this is the idea in early Buddhism that all of these elements are indeed limitless. They are in all things. So everything that we see around us, everything in physical reality, is composed of a mixture of these four elements. So fire is in all things. We might say that some amount of warmth is in everything that surrounds us. And so when we contemplate fire in this respect, we're contemplating the warmth that exists in all things. And fourth, the Buddha tells his son Rahula to meditate like the wind, to have a mind like the wind. Again, the wind blows over all kinds of things. It blows around all kinds of things. Even things like pus, blood, feces, urine, spit, and all the rest that we consider somewhat repellent or disgusting. The wind doesn't care, the air doesn't care, it blows over it. We might say it cleans it off by blowing things off of it. And so if we enter into a mind state that is inspired by the wind and inspired by these other elements, we can get into a mind state of true equanimity. And similarly, Sariputta says that he lives with a mind like the wind, that is, again, limitless, that is without ill will, without anger, without any negative attitudes towards others, that is always mindful of this all-pervading aspect to kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. Now, how are we to understand these practices in their depth? The Buddha tells his son Rahula that when you meditate in these ways, pleasant and unpleasant contacts will not occupy your mind. Pleasant and unpleasant contacts, these are the ways that the world impinges on our sense organs. And a young child, such as Rahula was at the time, or those of us who are, shall we say, beginning our practices, and I certainly consider myself in that camp, we are oftentimes obsessed by the experience coming from our senses. We something that is painful or something that is particularly pleasant will obsess the mind for periods of time. We get into periods of what's called mental proliferation, where we just spend time thinking about the same things over and over again, be they pains or be they pleasures. And it's just this kind of obsessive thinking which is the target, I think, of these practices. That once we come to a place of equanimity, these kinds of obsessions, these kinds of mental proliferation begin to evaporate. They have less of a hold on us. So we don't constantly think about, oh, when's the next time I can have this particular pleasure, or how do I escape this particular pain? We don't think about those things obsessively over and over. Rather, we let them go. In a different sutta, one that I haven't discussed yet in this video, Sariputta discusses unpleasant contact that we might have in the context of an element's practice. In this sutta, he's talking about when a monastic, such as himself or somebody else that he's discussing with, might be harassed or attacked by people who disagree with them, or people who want to make fun of them, or get them to leave, or just are nasty people. In other words, when you go out into the world, sometimes you'll encounter nasty people who do nasty things. And what Sariputta suggests here is that we're to sort of understand in this context, this painful feeling born of, let's say, ear contact has arisen in me. That's dependent, not independent. Dependent upon what? Dependent upon contact. They see that contact, feeling, perception, our choices, and our consciousness are impermanent. Based on that element alone, their mind becomes eager, confident, settled, and decided. Now, based on that element alone, in the context of this sutta, he's talking about the earth element, so perhaps what he means is that contemplating only the earth element is enough to sort of get us to settle our mind. Now, what is the Sariputta talking about here? Well, what he's talking about is this negative experience through the ear contact. So somebody else, let's say, is abusing us verbally. So instead of taking that to heart and taking it personally and getting obsessed with or angry about this kind of verbal attack, instead we think of it in terms of the earth element. That is, we contemplate this verbal harassment that we're getting as simply contact coming through the ear created by objects made up of the earth element. We might say it's sort of like an unpleasant sound created by the grinding of rocks together or something like that. And if we contemplate this harassment in those terms, this verbal harassment in those terms, we can become more confident about it. We can become more settled about it. We can become more equanimous with it. It no longer upsets us because we're not thinking of it in personal terms. What we're trying to do here, what Sariputta is trying to do here, is to depersonalize the harassment we're getting so that we're not thinking it in terms of I or mine, and so this is also in its own way a non-self practice. As we contemplate these things as simply being contacts of earth element, we cease to take them personally, and we're able to deal with them better. And we might have similar practices involving the other three elements. We might also think of these as wind that's simply blowing around, or we might think of them as water element, or air, or I should say the heat element, a fire element in certain respects. And all of these depersonalize the harassment we might be getting enough so that we can see through it, that we're not affected by it, that we can be more, at least somewhat more equanimous with it. In my next video, I'll be pointing to yet a third practice that is a sort of similar kind of practice that comes out of these four elements in the early Buddhist tradition. When it's ready, I'll leave a link to it up here on the screen. If you're getting something out of these videos of mine, consider taking a look over at my Patreon page and helping out the channel. Thanks so much to all of you, to my patrons over on Patreon, and we'll catch you on the next video.